Calling to order the special meeting of the Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission on August 21st, 2023. Calling to order. Mr. Norwood, would you like to do a roll call, please?
Yes. Okay. Commissioner Rohr?
Present.
Commissioner Zuniga?
Present.
Commissioner McCredden?
Present.
We'll wait a second. Commissioner Hess? Commissioner Cash Cooley? Commissioner Banks? Vice Chair Nguyen?
Present.
Chair Zimmer?
Present. Okay. Commissioner McCredden, would you like to lead us in the land acknowledgement and Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Yes. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we live, work, learn, and commune is the original homelands of the indigenous people of West Sacramento, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We acknowledge and we thank the original inhabitants who have occupied, maintained, and secured this place and who still exist on this land. We respect, celebrate the many diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land on which we gather. Thank you. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We'll start with the General Administration Function Part 1. Swearing in of Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission members. We have one new member, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Norwood.
All right, awesome. We have Pearson Rohr, Commissioner Rohr. You'll just repeat after me, and then we'll be done.
All right.
Okay. I, Pearson Rohr, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
I, Pearson Rohr, do solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies,
and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
that
I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
I will bear true faith toward the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I will take this obligation freely
that I will take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
and I will well and dutifully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Commissioner Rohr.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, would you like to just share with us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you work, where you live, and what your interest is here?
Yes, absolutely. I have lived in West Sacramento since 2020. I live in District 2, truly love it there, and I work as the Director of Outreach and Partnerships for the Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates. I am also a league-certified bicycling instructor for safety and riding and mechanics for North Natoma's Jibe, and as well as SAPA.
Great, thank you very much. Can you pause 1 second? Good evening. I'd like to note that Commissioner Banks is also here and can be counted on the roll. Good evening. Okay, I'm going to move on to the second item on the agenda, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the Commission. We should note that the commission is prohibited by law from discussing issues that are not on the agenda brought to them at this time. Do we have any presentations by the public?
We do not.
We do not. Okay, thank you very much. Item number 3 is disclosure of ex parte communications. Are there any commissioners who would like to disclose any ex parte communications?
I think I need to go ahead and mention something here. I did notice that for the sidewalk presentation, the walk audits were put in forth by a Jordan Grimaldi of Civic Thread. I have worked with Jordan Grimaldi in the past, and Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocate shares a building with Civic Thread.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And is that all we need to say? Okay, great. I'm going to move on to the consent agenda, and this is a consideration of approval of the June 5th, 2023 Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minute?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Nora, would you like to take the roll, please?
Absolutely. Commissioner Rohr,
Aye.
Vice Chair Nguyen,
Aye.
Chair Zimmer,
Aye.
and would I do you too? You already motioned.
Aye.
Commissioner Zuniga, would I ask you as well?
Since I brought the motion.
No.
Well, protocol is to go down the line.
Down the
Okay, then
Okay.
aye.
and I believe Commissioner Banks.
Aye.
Okay. The motion passes. The minutes are approved. Okay, moving on to the regular agenda. Presentation and discussion of updates to the Sidewalks and Transportation Equity Program.
Press down.
Green. Oh, okay, there we go. Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Chan. I'm a senior transportation planner with the Community Development Department. Tonight, I'll be giving a presentation on the Sidewalks and Transportation Equity Program. This is a project that is a grant-funded project by the Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant. We last presented this to TMI Commission and City Council in February of 2023 to give you some background, since I know we have a new commissioner and there might be others listening in on this meeting. The Sidewalk and Transportation Equity Program is a project that will inventory the sidewalk infrastructure within the city and prioritize projects based upon a prioritization framework that I'll be sharing tonight. So like I mentioned, we presented to TMI Commission and City Council in February of 2023 with the vision and the goals of the project. For this presentation tonight, I will provide you with an update on our community engagement activities since then, share with you the draft prioritization framework, and then a project timeline. So since February of 2023, the consultant team and the city staff began phase 2 of our engagement effort. Phase 1 was presented to the TMI Commission and City Council back in February, where we conducted case study interviews with some select agencies where we tried to understand their sidewalk prioritization programs and how they embedded equity into their program. And we had presented the findings from that of the case studies to the TMI Commission. During phase 2 of our engagement activities, we conducted more engagement activities at the city level, where we conducted feedback regarding the city's pedestrian network in order to identify the prioritization framework. So we conducted sidewalk audits, focus group interviews, a community survey, and pop-ups. The engagement summary is actually posted on the city's project website for this project, and over the next few slides, I'm going to be providing a summary of these activities. So the project team hosted 3 community sidewalk audits in the months of April and May, as shown here. Over these 3 events, there were 26 participants. The overall goals of the community sidewalk audit was to discuss and ground truth community values and concerns regarding pedestrian infrastructure, identify safety hazards, identify sidewalk and other pedestrian improvements, and then support selection for priority projects. So during the sidewalk audit, we gave participants an optional demographics survey, and we received 19 responses. The next few slides go over the demographics of the participants. So we had a fairly even representation in terms of age. The largest representation was about 18 to 30 years old. We actually had a wide range of participants. Our first audit had participants who age ranged from 4 to 85. The majority of our participants identified as female, and there was a fairly even split across income levels, with the 2 highest represented groups falling within the less than $25,000 household $1,000 for household income and $50,000 to $75,000 household income. So during the community sidewalk audit, participants were able to discuss their pedestrian values and sidewalk priorities through several activities. There was a cognitive map, so that's shown on the bottom right, and that map allowed people to identify the routes they often utilized or that they wish they could use more. We did a card sorting activity where people can vote on the amenities and the deficiencies of the pedestrian experience. So that's shown on the top over there, where you can see sidewalk buffers, wide sidewalks, missing sidewalks, and deteriorating sidewalks. There were more than that, but those are a couple examples of this card sorting activity. And people were able to identify, based on these definitions of pedestrian infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure and experience was important to them. During the discussion activity for these 2 activities, the participants were asked to provide feedback on their experience citywide rather than specific to the sidewalk audit. And the last activity we did was a sidewalk audit where people were able to walk in a pre-designated route nearby the site and write down their experience walking along that route, and if there was like missing infrastructure such as lighting, or if they felt like the sidewalk was wide enough, if there were any cracks in the sidewalk, how they felt about like crossing and the vehicle speeds and things like that. So the first sidewalk audit was hosted in the Broderick Bright area at Lighthouse Charter School. We had 11 participants, and we had 2 Russian interpreters available. You'll see that through the next several slides summarizing the sidewalk audits, that the top concerns were kind of, there's a theme running along them. So the top concerns here were lack of seating, sidewalk gaps, and ADA noncompliance. Key destinations to participants in this area involved the Sacramento River and the Levee Access Road. The second sidewalk audit was hosted at Joey Lopes Park, and at this audit we had 2 Spanish interpreters available. During the discussion, the participants noted that again, sidewalk gaps were one of their top concerns, as well as poor sidewalk conditions and traffic calming measures needed. And key destinations for this audit, participants identified as Sacramento Avenue, Harbor Boulevard, Evergreen Avenue, and West Cap Avenue. So a lot of those areas have a number of small businesses that these participants were interested in walking or biking or rolling to. Our last sidewalk audit was hosted at Disney Park and co-hosted with AARP. Disney Park is a playground located at Bright Park, and we had 9 participants at this audit. Again, a top concern that came up was sidewalk gaps and poor sidewalk conditions and traffic calming measures needed. And overall, when we did the sidewalk audit portion of this, participants had their own sheets where they could answer to the prompts and write down their own experience. And this is a cumulative summary of all the routes. It is important to note that at one of the sidewalk audits, and on these previous slides, the maps on the right show the audit routes that were available to the participants. And it's important to note that for the Broderick Bright audit, the audit in yellow is actually an audit around the Lighthouse Charter School. And since that was recently constructed, the sidewalk conditions around that audit were rather safe and completed. So that may have affected the responses a bit. And then in the other scenarios for Joby Lopes, we only did 1 route. And then for the Bright Park audit, the participants decided that we all wanted to do 1 route together. So I think on this one, we ended up doing the red route. And if you look at the comment response of the sidewalk audits, you can see that a majority of respondents felt that the sidewalk was not wide enough. This one is kind of in a good split, with 51% saying no, but with the not sure and unanswered, that's more like a 60-40 split. With the regards into lighting, this is a higher differential, where 59% of respondents said that they didn't feel like the area was well lit enough during nighttime. So only 9% of the respondents felt like the area they audited was well lit enough. And the same goes for tree shading, where a majority of respondents felt like there was not enough shade structure. And then a lot of the respondents also felt like 60% felt like the sidewalks were cracked, crumbling, or uneven. So we also did focus group interviews that fall in line with the activities conducted at the sidewalk audits. So we also shared the cognitive map activity, as well as the sidewalk amenities and efficiency cards for people to select. So we did 3 focus group interviews at events that were already occurring. 2 of them were already occurring. So we worked with the Arthur F. Turner Library across the street during their Dia los Niños event, and we had a table there, and we were able to capture the participants who attended the Dia los Niños event. And then we also had a booth at the Senior Resource Fair to capture the our older residents who attended the resource fair. And the 3rd event we did was actually based upon kind of a relationship that our consultant was able to build with the Slavic Baptist Church. And the Slavic Baptist Church was open to the project team hosting a community forum at one of their, so they have an older church located in the Bright Park area, and their current church is more in the West Acre neighborhood. But they still utilize the old church in the Bright neighborhood for community events, or for they were that day that they were actually doing something where they were the fathers were helping their sons their children make things for Mother's Day. So they actually still use this old church location for community events, but they allowed us to use that site to host a community forum, and they promoted it through their regular sermons, and that this event will be going on, and encouraged their congregation to attend. And so we had our Russian interpreters there too, and this was more of a meeting format, and we discussed like active transportation barriers, their active transportation priorities, and ways that we could engage their community more, because we have heard in the past that there's been difficulties in reaching our Russian and Slavic communities in West Sacramento. So from this activity, it wasn't as defined as the card sort or the cognitive map activity, but we were able to understand, and again, heard kind of the same things again, where there's lack of lighting, sidewalk gaps, lack of shade structures, lack of safe crossings. There's speeding throughout the community that makes people feel unsafe, and that's why they don't feel comfortable allowing their children to walk in the community. And so this is a slide showing the combined results from all the sidewalk audits and the pop-up events for the card sort activities. So this was, again, the sidewalk amenities and deficiencies. So the highest amenities that people would like to see more would be lighting and safer crossings and tree canopy, whereas like the highest deficiency or the reason why they don't feel comfortable walking, and these are kind of converse of each other, so a lot of people did identify that it was difficult to choose, but the reason why they aren't walking more would be missing sidewalks or deteriorating sidewalks, and fixing those issues would go a long way in helping the pedestrian network. So key themes and takeaways from the community outreach during phase 2 was a age-friendly network on ADA accessibility, safe routes to school, parks, trails, and shopping centers. Anywhere and everywhere was kind of mentioned. A well-connected, maintained, and safe pedestrian network with no sidewalk gaps or trip hazards, and well-lit. To keep a sustained engagement and transparency between the community members and city staff throughout this project, and to prioritize funding for areas where resources are needed the most, aka areas with high concentrations of youth, prevalence of missing sidewalks, or destination locations. So we also conducted a survey during this time, and the survey was available between August 7th to May 22nd. The survey was conducted primarily on the internet and by telephone, although hard copies were available by request. Through the survey, we were able to collect 475 responses. Through the telephonic process of collecting responses, they dialed 56,000 times. So 4 rounds, each number was passed by 2 times. And then the web internet version of the survey was shared across our social media, as well as shared in the city's utility mailer with a link to the survey. And the survey was available in English, Spanish, and Russian. And then the survey results were actually weighted so that the results were consistent with the U.S. Census data for the city. And in addition to the promotional activities the city did, the consultant staff also partnered with 3 local organizations to promote the survey. So we partnered with the Slavic American Chamber of Commerce, the Mercy Coalition of West Sacramento, and the Holy Cross Parish of West Sacramento in order to promote the survey through their channels and their members. Additionally, our consultant team held 4 pop-up events to provide on-the-spot survey collection. So they just set up a booth and had hard copies of the survey, as well as like a little iPad to collect survey responses and walk people through the questions if they needed assistance. And here are just some pictures of where we posted our surveys, as well as some of our pop-up events. And again, a few more pictures of our survey promotional material shared in Spanish and Russian. So from the survey, we received 475 responses. The majority of survey respondents were between the ages of 31 to 44 years old. And about 76% of our respondents identified as white. 76% of our respondents identified as not Hispanic or Latino, and about 65% identified as white. Also, our survey was predominantly completed by English speakers. 97% of respondents spoke English, and then we did have a couple who did respond to the English the survey in Russian and Spanish. The majority of respondents were also females, so 60% of our respondents identified as women. And to get past the demographic data for the survey, there were some questions that we asked during the survey that I'll go over in the next few slides. So we asked people how often during the week do they walk or roll in the city, and 35% of respondents said they actually use active transportation more than 5 times a week, which is great. And we asked if, when they're walking, where are they most interested in using the sidewalk to access? This one's surprising. The majority of respondents, close to 30%, said parks, but a high percentage, about 27%, said other destinations. We did list grocery stores, school and work, and entertainment and restaurants, so it does sound like people are using active transportation for various means in the city. We asked which of the sidewalk or street design elements would encourage you to walk or roll more in the city, and the majority of respondents, 37% of respondents, said continuous sidewalks. There are areas, as the city staff is aware, that there are missing sidewalk gaps in our city versus other areas where we don't have sidewalks because they're in more rural areas of our city. So continuous sidewalks was a reference to the areas where in our city where we have sidewalks for a bit and then maybe a house or two along those areas are missing sidewalks.
Sorry to interrupt. Our presentations have.
Oh,
Now
okay. And then we asked if it is important to install sidewalks on both sides of the road in industrial and rural areas. And this had overwhelming support from respondents. Over 70% said that it is important for them to have sidewalks on both sides of the streets. This is interesting and useful for the city because our current design standards requires only sidewalks on one side of the street in certain areas of the city, aka industrial and rural, north of the deep watershed channel. So this provides us some insight and potential reasoning to recommend updates to our sidewalk or our design standards. We also asked the survey respondents if they agree with the following statement. Prioritizing funding where there is the greatest need for sidewalk improvements means that some parts of the city will see sidewalk improvements sooner than others. And respondents were, again, overwhelmingly supportive of this approach, that, there's only so much funding and that the city has available, and we need to be able to prioritize where there is the greatest need. And then we asked in the survey, when improving existing sidewalks, what should the city use the funding to first improve? And this had a wide range of response options, where it's like if it were safe routes to parks, schools, healthy food options, etc., or if there's current gaps in the sidewalk network, or if there's currently a high volume of pedestrians. So these aren't really limited to identifying the exact location you're walking, just in general, what is your value in where we should first invest money. And I would say the top three responses are pretty close, where people did say safe routes to everywhere is important to them, as well as closing all the gaps in our sidewalk network and fixing areas where we have trip hazards. So we asked, when improving walking conditions in West Sacramento, it is important to me that sidewalks in communities with high numbers of the following populations be prioritized for investment. So this was trying to understand the community's values, and like if there's a particular population where sidewalk improvements should be put first, and where pedestrian infrastructure is most needed. And respondents said that they feel that it's important to prioritize people who don't have access to a car, as well as older adults. And then a little bit similar to the other questions, but this is focusing on constructing new sidewalks as compared to using funding for existing sidewalks. But when constructing new sidewalks, we asked if where we should prioritize the funding. And again, the top three responses are pretty close, where the responses ended up being where there are no sidewalks on both sides of the street, to serve people who rely on walking the most, and around safe routes to everywhere, schools, parks, healthy food options, and other community destinations. And then another question on the survey is if it is important if it's more important for us, the city, to install sidewalks where they don't exist or repair sidewalks. And this is a true or false. So the more respondents felt that it was more important for them to install new sidewalks where they currently don't exist than to repair existing or improve existing sidewalks to meet the city's design standards. So taking all that information, we synthesized it to create the draft prioritization framework. And so a refresher from the previous presentation, where we focused on the vision and the goals of the Sidewalk and Transportation Equity Program. We also went through the equity framework, because as part of the grant application, we wrote this grant to focus on an equity-based program. And we presented the Equity Best Practices Memo to the TMI Commission and City Council in February of 2023. So just as a refresher, this project team proposed using equity as an overarching theme through the project, and this was supported by the advisory committee, the TMI Commission, and the City Council back in 2023, in February 2023. So this is coming back into the development of the prioritization framework here. So before I share the prioritization framework with you, there was another outreach activity we did before presenting to TMI Commission tonight, which was sharing the prioritization framework with the YOLO Climate Action Commission, Equity Engagement Working Group, and the Sacramento Area Council of Governments to understand their perspective on the framework we developed, and how does it relate to their current equity practices, or maybe the resources of data that they have available, or moving forward, how do they see this prioritization framework being supportive of the overall goals in the region. And so their feedback was incorporated into the framework that I'm sharing on the next two slides. So before I get into so the framework itself is shown on this slide here. So we have 5 steps. The first step, I wouldn't say is necessarily part of the prioritization framework. They're kind of pre-activities, but we need these steps to be completed in order to have projects and go through the framework. So the first prioritization steps would be having a list of projects. So having a list of areas that we know have sidewalk gaps and their issues. And this is, again, developed separately from the prioritization framework. It's based upon feedback from our capital projects team and other city staff. We decided on a minimum project value of $100,000 so that it's competitive. It would be able to be competitively bid if we wanted to put it out. It also, the creation of the projects were dependent on certain things that we could group together. So for example, if we were able to group a number of segments next to a school together to create one project, because there's a number of gaps in the city where it doesn't make sense to do a gap that's only 200 feet long. So we tried to create a list of projects that made sense and would be eligible for funding or competitive for a contractor to bid on it. And then the second side of this was developing our equity priority areas. So since this was an overarching theme of how we want to embed equity through our process, we also wanted to look at how to identify equity areas, so areas that we want to focus on and invest in separately from the prioritization process. And this eventually, based upon feedback and city staff and the consultant team going back and forth, landed on defining the equity priority area as areas that are 200% or areas that met two criteria. So it's below the federal poverty line by 200%, or areas that had a high BIPOC population, the Black, Indigenous, people of color population. And then, so with those two kind of the project list and the equity priority area developed, you can put those aside for the beginning, and then we actually go into the prioritization framework itself. So the prioritization framework involves identifying high needs street segments to support project identification. So I'll go more into this on the next slide of how we identified high needs street segments. And then after we do that, we will apply a weighting. So this is taking into account the equity priority areas and the street segments to apply a weighting where we'll weight equity priority areas higher so that those areas can see the projects be moved forward, and they'll rank higher on the prioritization framework because there are equity priority areas. We haven't decided on a weighting differential between the equity priority areas or our high need street segments yet, and that can be further discussed. The next step after we weight, we'll have a project prioritization list with scores, and with that project scoring, we'll ground truth the projects that rank to the top with our community and partners. Engagement members, so the people that were either possibly involved during our sidewalk audits or possibly doing additional outreach events where we can do pop-ups or other, take advantage of other activities in the fall that the city's hosting, and kind of validate the results from this quantitative process. And then the last step would be to evaluate the implementability of projects. So again, this is a little bit separate from the prioritization framework itself. This is looking at the projects that rise to the top and seeing if there are funding sources that match the description of the project, and if they're implementable in the sense of right away, and if the city has the ability to if the city could do those quickly versus if they would need a further coordination with other groups. And so that is, again, separate a little bit from the prioritization framework itself, but it is within the whole prioritization process because there might be a near-term low effort but high impact project that arises after we identify the implementability of projects. So this slide goes back to the second step where I talked about the high need street factors. And so the project team identified factors that related to the goals that were presented to TMI Commission and City Council in February of safety and safe routes, health and environment, and equitable access. And the factors that we've included for safety and safe routes is proximity to key destinations. There was a point where we had separated this into different factors, but based upon the feedback from like our community members, as well as like the interest in having safe routes to everywhere, we compressed this into one, and it's a general, just key destinations. The number of pedestrian and bicycle involved fatal or severe injury crashes, and population density and posted speeds. And those are the 4 factors that are currently proposed for the safety and safe routes goal. Health and environment, the proposed factors are diabetes rates and asthma rates. And for equitable access, the proposed factors are sidewalk absence and gaps. So if you remember back on the earlier update back in February, we did collect drone data, and we did a aerial review of the city's infrastructure to identify where there's sidewalk gaps. So that's what we utilize that data collection for this factor here. And then other equitable access factors include older adults, percentage older adults, percentage of youth, percentage of zero vehicle households, and percentage of persons with disabilities. And to note, again, this is a draft prioritization framework. Currently, we're trying to look if there's a additional metric we can use for persons with disabilities. From my understanding from the American Census Survey and the census data, this data isn't too granular at the census tract level, so we're trying to find something that could supplement this factor and help us identify areas that might be non-ADA compliant and would allow us to have a more refined data at the census tract level. And so when we shared the that high street needs network and the prioritization framework, we asked our advisory committee, we asked the agencies we reached out to the following questions here: if these are the right indicators or factors, if they have any insight on whether some factors should be weighted more, or if the overall process, the equity factor or the high need street segments should be weighted in some way, and also if they felt like the process we have identified reflects the original target audience and the priority groups we established through the vision and the goals of the project. So we can get back to this if you do have any feedback about the prioritization framework or the high need street segment criteria. But before we can get back to that, I'd like to give some updates on the project. So we're currently going through giving an update to TMI Commission. The intent is to bring a similar presentation to City Council in September with the prioritization framework, and then conduct a draft step plan open for City Council feedback before posting it for a 30-day public review. And when we have the draft step plan ready, we'll also do 2 more focus group interviews. We haven't identified those, what focus group participants we are planning to reach out to yet. So that's to be coming. And then in late October to November, after the draft prioritization draft step plan has been available for a 30-day public review period, we plan to bring the step plan back to City Council for adoption. At the same time, we want to do a city council mobilization training for our advisory committee members. So that training will provide our advisory committee members the information and tools for them to go to a city council meeting. What does it mean? Like, how can they get involved in the process? And like, because too many people not involved in like civic duties or like involved in public participation much, it seems like a big barrier to even go to city council and speak up at a city council meeting. So we wanted to provide our advisory committee members some training on how they can approach showing their support or not support of something. And that way they can, utilize that in their own life, as well as spread that information within their community group as well. And like I said, we haven't identified who we want to conduct the last two focus group interviews with, and this is doing a focus group interview regarding the whole draft step plan. So currently, some ideas that the consultant team and the city staff are thinking is to host a couple pop-ups, possibly re-engaging the sidewalk audit participants or the pop-up participants who have provided their contact information, and seeing if they would like to see how their feedback has been incorporated into the project since April to May of this year. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Before we get into questions, I wanted to ask, are there any public comments for this item?
We do not have any.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, commissioners, any questions or comments? Anyone would like to lead us off?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So when thinking about street segments to prioritize, I'm wondering if adding the factor of proximity of street segments to one another is already included. I didn't notice it myself, but there may be a street segment that's a high priority, and there may be another street segment that's several priority levels down, but is right next to the high priority one. And in that case, it would be efficient to do them at the same time, even if one is lower. So it may be a factor to consider.
I'd like to thank Stephanie Chen for her time and in presenting this information to us. Thank you very much. I'd love to address, kind of add on to what was said just now, but it was mentioned that sometimes it's some things that are on the lowest priority of being worked on, maybe sections of maybe 200 meter or 200 foot sections that's it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of money on. What I would recommend looking out for is if there are any of those sort of low priority connectors in between these projects that are for sure going to be prioritized, to make sure to prioritize the connectors between those two, because one of the main things that will keep people off of these projects and not using them is, I don't feel safe sending my kids out to use this project. I don't feel safe riding, a bicycle or rolling on micromobility between these places. So you can always put a lot of work into these projects, but if they're not connected, then it's almost, the usability goes down. So I would suggest to really prioritize those connectors, even if they seem low priority by the data.
Great, thank you.
Hi, everybody. I apologize for my late arrival. I was working on something. How are you, everybody? I just had a question, Stephanie. Do we have any data that looked at sidewalks and accidents by comparison?
So under the safety and safe routes goal, there is a factor that we'll be looking at the number of pedestrian and bicycle involved injuries. So that's going to, I believe, be taken from TIMS or the transportation injury mapping tool from UC Berkeley. So it is included.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the asthma rates? I'm interested about that. How does that figure into the sidewalks and street factor? Does that have to do with overhead canopy and trees?
I think that this comes will play in a couple of different ways. One, there is studies that find that there's higher asthma rates in areas where there's particulate matter that is due to like trucks and other diesel vehicles, and just in general gasoline vehicles that are driving a lot. So the health and environment criteria, it was a bit difficult to identify like factors that would be that we should utilize for the health and environment that makes sense for encourages a healthy and active and lifestyle and non-single occupancy vehicle travel. Asthma rates and diabetes rates were recommended by our consultant team, and also I think the YOLO climate change working group also supported the use of these factors. I know that we had a couple public health masters or people with master degrees in public health work on the identifying like factors that would be useful in this scenario, and they also recommended asthma rates. In terms of like how does it relate, it could be a multitude where some of it is possibly like tree canopy cover, because the pedestrian experience is like beyond just having a sidewalk there. From our conversations and discussions with the public, as well as through our survey, we find that people want more than just a sidewalk. They want to feel safe. They want the lighting. They want like amenities. They need like tree and shading. So I would say that the asthma rates is a little bit tied to like how many, like a little bit tied to possibly how many people are making vehicular trips, and in that way possibly increasing the asthma rates in that certain census tract, as well as like if we were to develop a pedestrian infrastructure that is inclusive of like amenities that would like help reduce. In that way, it's like a tie to both.
A question about key destinations. I know you had mentioned that those had been grouped together into the first factor, and I was just curious how that would get parsed out and prioritized for all the different types of key destinations listed there.
So currently there's no prioritization within that. So it's not like parks are rated higher than healthy food access or anything. Currently, I think the intent is to keep that all equal. And then those destinations have a buffer zone. We're actually doing a walkshed zone. So instead of doing like a bird's eye view of like all the streets within like a quarter mile of that destination or whatever, I think that we created slightly different walking distance measures for each one, depending on if it overlapped and if it made sense. But it was generally a quarter mile for each of those destinations. And and again, instead of doing like a bird's eye view, we kind of did a walking shed of like a quarter mile to that location, because the city has a number of barriers, such as the rail line. So if we were just to plop it and then see the radius of that area, we would accidentally capture like streets that don't actually have a quarter mile distance.
So I noticed that when you're going over the demographic information from your walking audit, that it didn't cover whether or not those individuals had disabilities. And so that may have factored into the ranking of accessibilities for individuals with disabilities in your graph. So my suggestion would be to, for one of the 2 focus groups in the future to maybe see if you can get in contact with an organization that deals with disability.
I have something very minor, but I just noticed it. On the slide that had Arteaga's on it, I think that was the next. There it is. Yeah, the last. Their name is now State Food. That might, I don't know if that might come up later when you guys are using those names. So I just thought I'd.
Great.
I'd like to bring up one more thing about sidewalks. To me, it's hard to have a conversations about sidewalks without having a conversation about bicycles and micromobility. And I would believe colloquially that in a perfect world, micromobility such as electric scooters, bicycles, one wheels, things like that would be kept off sidewalks as much as possible in order to give priority to pedestrians and people with disabilities. I didn't see a lot, but I would suggest, if this hasn't been already done before, priority given to making sure that the infrastructure gives a preferable location for things like bicycles and other micromobility options in parallel to those traveling spaces of sidewalks, just so that they don't default to use of the sidewalks, which would, I guess in my estimation, keep the pedestrians and the people that you're trying to reach with this project away, even if they were good resources for those pedestrians. And I did have a quick question too. Was the new sidewalk construction near Burgers and Brew and Sal's Tacos, was this, I guess, projects sort of consulted with that new construction, or is that something that was sort of predated this?
That predated this project, but this project also took into, or is taking into account, like city constructed / other development to be constructed sidewalk improvements. So we consulted our community development planning team as well as our capital projects team on like their upcoming sidewalk improvement projects. And I think that part of it is going to come down to like the implementability step as well. And when we kind of look at, hey, we created this like project in this area, and we also know that this other project is going to create a sidewalk in a year. Mm-hmm. Like, can the timing of this make sense, or should we wait and let them do what they need to do? So those types of projects, it's difficult because there's a lot going on in the city, but we tried to take it into account.
Great. All right. Thank you very much.
I can really quick just kind of respond to that too. That project was from Riverwalk Trail North. So we had already had substantial design and funding for that project from approximately 3 years ago. And that project was designed consistent with the I Street Bridge Replacement Project. Right. So all of these, as Stephanie said, there's a lot going on. All of that had been prior funded, prior designed.
Thank you.
I appreciate all the comments. And Ms. Chan, thank you for the presentation. I want to say that I learned some things about my neighborhood. In full disclosure, I actually live in the area that you did most of the sidewalk audits, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to accompany you on the audit. I think I was out of town during those weeks. But I think you're spot on in who you're targeting in terms of schools and churches. I think that's really important, and I can make some comments. about that. You know, when you talk about places that people walk to, I think churches is a place where people do walk to. I can say on my street, I definitely see older adults walking down the street to church. So I'm glad that you're trying to engage in those communities. I think that's really important in my neighborhood. You know, I don't know if you're getting as much response from the Russian-speaking community. I hope that you are. I hope that they're responding via English. I think a good chunk of them actually do speak English pretty well, so hopefully they are responding. But I do see a lot of Russian-speaking adults that are walking around and going to church, and the sidewalks are definitely non-continuous, and they're often in the middle of the street. So I think your surveys are spot on. I was interested to see the result that folks were talking about walking to parks. I don't think I was expecting that, actually, so I was just thinking on that, like who would be in the parks, and it might be, you know, maybe there's a day to target in Bright Park. If you're going back to talk to people, like I know that sometimes on Saturday mornings there's tons of people having their kids play soccer. I don't know if that would be a good place to reach certain communities that might be using the parks. You know, a lot of folks are walking their dogs. I think one of the big challenges in Bright is going to be, you know, building sidewalks without taking away too many trees. There's not a ton of space. The streets are pretty narrow, and sometimes the houses are pretty close to the street, and, you know, the trees are kind of right there, and they're nice, right? They're nice to have trees, but if you were going to put sidewalks in, you might be cutting down trees or cutting into people's yards. And, you know, that might work in some cases and might not work in other cases. But I was also sort of thinking about, like, where would a good spot for a sidewalk with trees be? And I was just thinking Riverbank Road. You know, if people are walking to Bright Park or walking to the trails along the north side of the river, and I think they do, there's a lot of folks that walk their dogs and do exercise out there. I don't know how they're accessing that area. They might be driving. But, you know, anything we can do to get them into the park and so they can walk to those areas where they're already trying to exercise and walk their dogs would be great. And Riverbank Road might be a low-hanging fruit, because you might be able to, you know, easily put in a sidewalk, you know, on the properties that are currently used by Department of Water Resources and U.S. Army Corps. There might be some space over there underneath the trees, and without having to sacrifice trees. I'm not sure. So I thought that was, yeah, it's interesting. I think it's going to be really challenging to not lose shade in some of those areas. I don't know, I'm just making comments here. I was also wondering if the Brightway Market or any of these other little places that people come and go for a quick snack might be a good spot to reach people that might not otherwise be easy to reach, I guess. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the supermarket's a good idea. That's sort of the same kind of thing. I was curious, it sounds like the funding we have now is for the planning and the surveys, and I was just sort of curious, you know, how much would it cost, do you think, per block? Like, what are we looking at in terms of costs, or do we have any idea at this point in time?
I think it's blanking on me right now, but I think I do remember, sidewalk is actually pretty expensive. Yeah. And I think, the square foot of it was, do you remember that recent engineer's estimate we were working on? Jason?
No, unfortunately, I don't recall that, but that's information that we can get to you.
I participated in, you remember, Stephanie, the second one in Joey Lopez Park, and that was literally right behind the street where I live on, I think it's Merkley, West Acre, around West Acre, Merkley. So is that a priority area? So what I'm trying to understand is that the places where we did the walks and the audits, are those the priority areas, or were those just places that you just picked?
Those are just areas that we just picked,
Okay.
/ sometimes also areas where we could get a site that we could host the discussion at.
Right.
So we were a bit limited in that regard. In terms of the equity priority areas, with the poverty level 200% below and the BIPOC population, it tends to primarily be the northern section of the city, north of the Deep Watership Channel. I think mostly just doesn't include the Bridge District area.
So what are the priority areas again? They're the northern part of the city, like Broderick, Bright is?
For the equity priority areas,
Okay.
yes.
Not this area downtown, the central business
That is included based on the equity priority
Okay.
definitions.
Got it.
If residents choose to update the sidewalks in front of their homes, just on their own accord, they're having to follow these standards that you guys are looking at? Or, I mean, if they go through the proper channels through the city?
So
So sidewalks that are within the public right-of-way, if the public were to do improvements, there would have to be an encroachment permit that's obtained from the city, and yes, they would have to follow any of the standards. So for instance, someone can't put in a 6-inch sidewalk in front of their home. They would definitely have to follow whatever the city standard is. So right now for ADA accessibility, I believe the standard is 6 feet for a sidewalk. And I did look up a recent cost estimate, and it was $80 a linear foot to put in concrete. So you can imagine the cost is pretty expensive. Of course, it's more expensive for, the city to do that under prevailing wage, et cetera. So, costs can vary if they're done by, say, a private developer as opposed to a city project.
I had a quick question. Is it correct you just said the standard width for a sidewalk in the city is 6 feet?
For ADA accessibility, I believe it is. So that's recently changed from 5 feet. So my understanding, now, this is my understanding of what changing laws are. But the last that I understood, it was 6 feet. And in fact, most of our projects, when we're looking at our designs, such as updating our designs for the I Street Bridge, et cetera, those have 6-foot sidewalks. And you'll notice with C Street, what was just put in were 12-foot sidewalks because we were going for double wide sidewalks because we're, one, anticipating a large number of pedestrians crossing the bridge. 2, that is an area that's proposed for retail space below, fronting the sidewalk. So we're hoping to have more cafe seating, et cetera, along that stretch. And for those who see that it's been constructed, but we've stopped, there's no bike lane there. If you look at the design for I Street Bridge, when that project comes in, a lot of that is going to change. You're going to see parking protected bike lanes that are along C Street, where currently there are curb adjacent parking and no bike lane designated. There will be green bike lanes that are going to be along that stretch because it is an arterial.
That's great. There was a lot of, in the presentation, there was a lot of respondents that spoke about, is my sidewalk wide enough? Would they be open to widening the sidewalk? Is there a next, I know you mentioned 12 feet for a wider one. Is there like a standard option for the next widest sidewalk after 6 feet? Like kind of standardized within the city, or?
I think that our city design standards try to be flexible, given that in some areas of the city it's older and you can't, you wouldn't be able to extend without taking right away or going out into the public road. So there is flexibility, but I think the aspirational standard is 6 feet.
Great, thank you.
If I'm understanding correctly, it looks like the initial grant only covers the prioritization process, but wondering if the city has already identified any funding sources or is looking into that.
So part of this grant effort is a financing memorandum, and as part of the draft plan, there will be recommendations of potential funding sources that the city can go after, or there's also potential city funds that can be utilized. I believe Measure N from the city funds include community investment, which is something that has been referenced and discussed as a potential funding source for implementation of some of the priority projects.
Quick question, were there any, amongst the focus groups and things that were conducted, did any take place in Southport or south of the Deepwater Shipping Channel?
We did not conduct any of the outreach in south of the Deep Watershed Channel, unfortunately.
Does the scope sort of have that in its area of influence, or are there plans to sort of extend the sidewalk project down into that area? I know it kind of trails off into rural after a certain point, but
Yeah. So the plan itself does include looking at the citywide like sidewalk infrastructure. In terms of the outreach, we wanted to focus on areas where we knew there were gaps in the network. The Southport area tends to be an area where it was fully developed as a subdivision, and therefore, at the time of development, complied with ADA standards, or at least the ADA standards of that time, or are in like completely rural areas of our city, which then our current design standards for rural areas don't really require sidewalks.
great. As a little bit of a follow-up, I know that the number one place people like to walk to is parks. And I was wondering if we had any data as to which parks are being visited more or less, or if if there was like a ranking of those parks that people prioritize in their walking.
Yeah, that wasn't asked during this effort, but I can check if the Parks Department has any information on that.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to jump in real quick with a couple of things just to help clarify. So one of the things with this being an equity program, there was a large focus on disadvantaged community zone. There are no disadvantaged community zones south of the Deep Watershed Channel. So that's one important aspect. The other is that, as Stephanie had mentioned, there's a lot of new development there. Most things are in compliance, but there are areas that are not. So Marshall Road, Higgins Road, for instance, on Marshall, there's sidewalk only on one side. Higgins Road, it's intermittent. We are addressing both Marshall and Higgins with a city-funded capital improvement project. So you're going to see that come out of our division relatively soon. It is one of our top 3 priorities to work on. There's also gaps in areas like the Clarksburg Branch Line Trail. You'll see starts at one end, stops at the other. There are issues regarding that that we've tried for a number of years to address. And again, this is one of those situations where small segments of sidewalk infill is extremely difficult to get funded. We've tried it on 3 different occasions since I've been here in the last 9 years and have been unsuccessful every time to get grant funding for that. So to the extent possible, when we see something, a deficiency that we're unable to get grant funding for, we try to lump a bunch of projects together and then seek like ATP, which is Active Transportation Program grant funds, or regional grant funds.
Commissioners, any additional comments or questions? Okay, thank you, everybody. That was a great discussion, and appreciate everyone's time. I don't believe we're expected to take any action on that item, so we will move on to the General Administration Function Part 2. The commission calendar. I believe our next regularly scheduled meeting is on September 5th, which is Labor Day, so I might request that be moved.
Madam Chair, typically we'll look at the following week, but we'll let you know when there's an alternate date that we can have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Part B is staff reports. Are there any staff reports today?
None at this time.
None at this time. Okay. Then the last item is to adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Second. Commissioner McCredden seconds. Mr. Norwood, would you like to take the roll or the vote for that?
We can just do a simple all those in favor.
All
those in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, this meeting is adjourned.